Thursday, we will celebrate the feast of the presentation of Jesus in the temple. And as we know, the presentation is the fourth joyful mystery of the Holy Rosary. And when I think of this event in our blessed Lord's life, when I pray that mystery of the Rosary, I think of how we should be presenting ourselves to God as Mary presented Jesus to him. So today I'd like to share with you a few thoughts about how we can present ourselves to God. I have to tell you that every time I come here to the shrine, I cannot help but go back in time to when I was a novice here in 1955. We used to get up at 5 in the morning. Our beloved novice master would wake us up by going through the dormitories, ringing this big, loud bell and shouting in Latin, "Let us bless the Lord." And we novices were supposed to shout back in Latin, "Thanks be to God." Folks, let me tell you, there are a few things I would like to have shouted back to my novice master. Thanks be to God was not one of them. But you want to know something? The thought comes to me now. If we want to present ourselves to God, we have to begin to do that early in the morning. Our first thoughts really should be of Him. We really should be shouting out, "Let us bless the Lord. Thanks be to God." You know, to present ourselves to God, we have to continue to be mindful of the presence of His Son Jesus throughout the day. And that means spending time with Him in prayer. A woman tells this story. She says her husband is a Protestant minister. And one Sunday he was very impassionately preaching a sermon on the evils of television. And he said to the congregation, "It steals away precious time that could be better spent on other things, like praying to God." And then he advised the congregation to do what he and his family had done. He said, "We put our television set into the closet." And his wife said she was sitting in the congregation next to a friend, and she turned to her friend and whispered, "That's right. And it gets awfully crowded in that closet." Now, folks, I am not saying, nor is the Lord saying, that we should put our television set in the closet and not watch it at all. But what we are saying is that we should never let television or anything else take precedence over God and our quest for the kingdom of God. You know, to offer ourselves to God means that we have to choose Him above all things, all the possessions of the world. And really that does include our television set. And I do think that being faithful to God in prayer each day is a good proof that we really do want to present ourselves to God completely. But to present ourselves to God completely, there's another very important thing that we have to do. A woman tells this story. She says she is a high school counselor, and she knows all the signs of emotional problems that the kids go through. And she said one morning her teenage son showed up for breakfast, dragging his feet and rubbing his eyes. And she said he flopped down in his chair, turned to her and said, "Mom, I'm sick of life." Well, she says that being a high school counselor, she was aware of how teenagers sometimes think of even committing suicide. So she put her arm around her son and began to explain to him why life was worth living. She said her son looked at her with a confused look on his face, and he said, "Mom, what are you talking about? I mean, I'm sick of life cereal. Folks, let me tell you, a lot of people are sick of life. And I don't mean the cereal. They're sick of having to put up with suffering in their life. Come on, let's face it. We don't like to suffer. And I think we have to be able to accept our sufferings if we want to present ourselves entirely to God. Yes, we do suffer. Do I have to go through the list? At times we get sick, loved one gets sick, loved one gets cancer, a marriage is breaking up, there's problem at work, or maybe even the problem is that there is no work. What I'm saying is, if we really want to present ourselves completely to God, we have to do what our Blessed Mother did. We have to say, fiat. Let it be done to me according to your will. We have to be able to climb up on the cross with Jesus and suffer along with him. In an episode of the comic strip Peanuts, Linus is talking to Charlie Brown, and now holding up his familiar security blanket. He says, "You know what, Charlie Brown? Only this 1 yard of flannel stands between me and a nervous breakdown." Folks, in reality, I really believe only Jesus and our Blessed Mother stand between us and a nervous breakdown. So when we are suffering, when things are going badly for us, let us turn to them and let us ask for their help. And as I always say, when we do turn to Mary and our Blessed Mother, we must place our full trust in them. They tell the story here of a middle-aged man who had made a men's retreat. And when he came home, he said to his wife, "Honey, my faith is now so deep that I have turned over 75% of my life to God." And he paused and said, "The other 25% is so important that I better take care of that myself." You know, we can smile at that statement because we know that something is lacking in that man's faith, his faith in God. That's no way to treat God. To present ourselves to God entirely, we must entrust ourselves to God entirely. We must place our full trust in him. And my final thought is this. Let me tell you what I think will happen if we do present ourselves completely and entirely to God. A man tells this story. His little girl needed an operation, and she was terrified at the prospect. And so to encourage her, he promised to give her something she had wanted for a very long time, her own little kitten. And the operation went well. But as the anesthesia was wearing off, the youngster was heard muttering to herself, "This sure is a lousy way to get a kitten." Folks, could it be that we are somewhat like that little girl? We have to endure not one difficult time, but many difficult times. And you know, Jesus tells us that we will have to suffer a great deal. And to encourage us, to give us the strength to go on, he promises us something our heart yearns for, and that is eternal happiness in the kingdom of heaven. But folks, we will never feel the way that girl did when we get to heaven and we look back on our trials and sufferings. We will never regret having presented ourselves completely to God. So as we continue our novena, please let us thank Mary, our Blessed Mother, for presenting Jesus to God, and let us ask her to present us to God as she presented